I want to thank you for being here. I want to welcome you to the closing plenary session for the amazing MAPS Psychedelic Science 2017 conference, and Beckley and others. You may have noticed when I stood up here at first that I just stood up here for a while. Because frankly, I love it. I just love seeing it and soaking it up and being, like I said on Friday morning, about being with people, every one of whom loves what I love. It's such a rare occasion and so beautiful and so encouraging and aligning, and so I stand here and I just sort of soak it up a little bit. But now, all right, so for the last 3 days, we've been around like-minded, like-hearted brothers and sisters, right? And now we're going to go home. I'm going to miss my psychedelic family. I really am. It's like leaving, to go back to the default world. So what's next then? What do? We go back. We go back to our communities as bodhisattvas. Right? So we take this, having aligned with this information, with this beauty and truth and light, we take it back and we shine it out like a star from the core, all the way truly out onto our family, onto our communities, and all the way out through to our entire planet to heal and help us all grow. And then also we take action, because we want to help things move along, so we align with groups such as MAPS, or the Beckley Foundation, or with scientific advocates, activists like Beatriz Labate, to support this profound and very profoundly important research, and to facilitate our wonderful momentum that we're celebrating here this weekend as well. So, please keep in touch with me. I'm Neil Goldsmith. I'm from New York, I've told you. I love the community. I'll see you next time. And we have a little surprise for you before we proceed to the speakers.
This is the world's
Toby?
largest yet gathering around psychedelics and psychedelic research.
How will you ever jump?
How beautiful. How beautiful. So now I'm going to introduce Natalie Lila Ginsberg, who is Policy and Advocacy Manager over at MAPS, and she's going to introduce you to some of our speakers tonight. Natalie earned her Master's in Social Work from Columbia University in 2014 and her Bachelor's in History from Yale University in 2011. At Columbia, Natalie served as a policy fellow at the Drug Policy Alliance, where she helped legalize medical marijuana in her home state of New York, and worked to end New York's racist marijuana arrests. She's also worked as a court-mandated therapist for individuals arrested for prostitution and drug-related charges. As a middle school guidance counselor in New York City's public schools, she did clinical work with trauma survivors, spurred her interest in psychedelic-assisted therapy, which she believes can ease a wide variety of both mental and physical ailments by addressing the root cause of individuals' difficulties rather than their symptoms. Through her work at MAPS, Natalie advocates for research to provide evidence-based alternatives to both the war on drugs and the current mental health paradigm. I'm going to turn you over to Natalie Ginsberg.
I'm deeply honored to be here to introduce the next 5 brave speakers who were asked at the very last minute to share some brief reflections on the conference. 2 of these speakers are pioneering psychedelic researchers, and 3 of these speakers received Perspectives Scholarship, generously supported by the Open Society Foundation, to bring underrepresented perspectives to this conference. I'm going to read their names, and then they're going to come up one at a time and share their thoughts. Camille Barton, Igor Yano, Draulio Arujo, Don Williams, and Lisana Redbear. Thank you.
Good night. I have to say that I'm really happy to be here with you all, sharing this moment that, in my opinion, and in everyone's opinion, it's a very special moment for psychedelic science, and it's a moment of a lot of opportunities, it's a moment of a lot of possibilities, so it's a moment of a lot of excitement. It's a moment of a lot of excitement if we consider that part of the argument, and a very strong argument, that was used in order to have psychedelics prohibited was the absence of controlled studies, was the absence of studies that would show the benefit of psychedelics to humans, to the human health. What we see very recently is that it's an increasing number of randomized controlled trials that are showing, almost 50 years later, the possibility of using psychedelics to treat different mental disorders. So we see randomized controlled trials in psilocybin to alleviate depression and anxiety in terminal cancer patients. We see our work with ayahuasca, a randomized controlled trial showing the benefit of ayahuasca in depression. And there are many other controlled trials to come. So that's not a problem anymore. We already have a number and an increasing number of controlled trials showing the potential benefit of psychedelics in human mental disorders. It's also a chance that we have to understand our mind. It's also a chance that science has to understand the human mind, with the help of psychedelics. Maybe this is an opportunity for science also to change its practice and do the practice of science as the practice with a lot of humbleness. So with that, I have to thank Amanda and Rick for bringing this whole thing together and allowing us to be part of this very special moment. Thank you all.
Hello, my name is Camille Barton, and I am the founder of the Collective Liberation Project. I'm really, really happy to have had the opportunity to have a scholarship to attend this conference. In addition to the work with the Collective Liberation Project, I'm a facilitator for the Psychedelic Society in the UK. So I work with them doing experience weekends, and I'm generally quite interested in fusing psychedelics and healing with social justice work. And so yesterday I was really pleased to host a workshop called White Allies and Anti-Racist Practice in the Psychedelic Community, and was really happy to see that it was oversubscribed. The room was packed, kind of a larger number of people than I would have ideally wanted for the session, but we let them in because there was so much demand. And I think this is really interesting and an important moment to think about intersectionality, to think about social justice and how we can start as a psychedelic community to engage with these issues and to transform the world around us, not just from a point of healing in terms of personal development, but to really look and think about how can we use psychedelic healing and medicine to also transform oppression in the world. So I'm really, really hopeful that as a community, that's something we can continue to engage with for the future, because I think we need to do that in these times. So one thing that came out of the session yesterday was that people of color in the workshop had the opportunity to give some suggestions about what they would like to see incorporated in future conferences like this, and also in the psychedelic community in general. And so I'll just give you a few of those things now, though this will be passed on to Natalie and hopefully to MAPS and the broader community. So some of the feedback that we got yesterday was that we'd really like to see more people of color's voices present in these conferences, presenting their research, but also invited to kind of attend and actually be here, whether that means that there's more scholarship tickets available, or we think about sliding scale options so that more of the community that are in Oakland, for example, could actually be present who have an interest in this work. We also think that there should be links cultivated with researchers of color who are doing other work in drug policy that's not necessarily psychedelic focused, so that more links can be made. And again, we can expand this work. Also thinking about more qualitative studies rather than just quantitative studies, and how that can tie into other work that's happening around epigenetics and intergenerational trauma. And really looking at how the relationship between legalization and incarceration works in this country, but also in different countries around the world. Because, for example, with legalization of cannabis in many places in the States now, is not really looking at the large population of particularly people of color who are still incarcerated for possession of cannabis. So I think these are all things that will be really useful for us as a community to try and create transformation and, hopefully create social change. Thank you.
Hello. So I was asked to speak about one thing about the conference, and I think what I would choose, apart from all the respect to MAPS and Beckley and all the other organizations, is some question just kept coming into my mind every time, which was, are we really ready for this psychedelic renaissance as a community, as a circle? I work a lot with spiritual emergency and people passing through these kinds of states, which are very similar to psychedelic states, or maybe the same. Are we integrating these people into our circle? Are we really able to work with this abreaction of deep unconscious material as a community? If this psychedelic renaissance is going to happen and this is going to be so much in the air, as a community, will we be able to really support all this material coming for the people, but also as a culture, because a lot of things are going to change. This is how I see. We are not only are we changing therapeutic models, but just having the psychedelic experience can change a lot of our world, a lot of our worldviews and our paradigms. So this is something I was asking myself. Also, I heard so many times the word psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, but we spoke a lot about psychedelics, but did we speak enough about psychotherapy? And did we speak enough about what healing means and where we want to go? I wouldn't like this to become like this narrow pharmacological model of just giving a pill. I think we really need to question a lot where we want to go, what healing means, what neurosis is as a collective. This is what I wanted to say.
Hello, my name is Dawn Davis. I just wanted to quickly thank again the Psychedelic Science Organization and Beatriz Labate for inviting me to come and do my presentation, and to also ask me to do part of the closing session. I also wanted to thank my scholarship funder, PNM Cosmos AGAP, for sending me to this conference and the ability to share my research with everybody. So my work has been in peyote and looking at preservation and sustainability of peyote in its wild habitat and preserving the native wild population along its natural range. But before, and so currently, that's what I had done for my thesis, but currently I also study another important medicine, which is water. That's my first medicine, actually. My second medicine is peyote. And so my research in water resources with the University of Idaho is also very important to me. However, I'm not able to do both, and so I'm glad that I have the opportunity to continue my peyote research in spaces like this. It's been very interesting, very eye-opening to come to this conference. This conference is not what I was expecting, and even now to see the amount of people that are here at the closing sessions is very impressive. And so it was eye-opening in the fact that I am recognizing more of the issues of peyote endangerment and the recognizing that there are so many issues surrounding peyote that I had not even thought about, and things that I was not really aware of. And so I'm appreciative to be able to see those points of view and to be able to understand how my work is affecting and can be complementary to those other fields. However, it's going to be very challenging. Peyote is a very sensitive subject, and it's also a very controversial subject. And being a woman in this field of a Native American religion is challenging. And so I deal with those struggles on a very large scale and on a very local scale within my own community. So I'm appreciative that I have this space to be able to express my opinion as a woman and as a Native American and Indigenous person. I was shocked to find out that the Psychedelic Science, that this is the first year that peyote has been a part of that platform. I just kind of assumed that was something being discussed since its initiation, but I was very wrong. And so I'm glad to be a part of the first year's introduction of peyote as part of the plant medicine track, and I hope that I can continue being a part of this work and having this voice in this space as an Indigenous person, because that's very much a part of understanding native plants and especially ethno-significant plants such as peyote. So I also wanted to commend MAPS for its organization. I was very impressed to find out that we could have the entire agenda and make communication through the apps that MAPS had. So I really enjoyed that. It was nice to have that. And the space that we're in, it's very great to have like-minded people, but I also want to remind everybody that it's important that we continue to talk to Indigenous peoples about native plants that they consider of ethno significance. So with that, thank you.
Good evening to each and every one of you across this room. I want to acknowledge the Creator and this Grandmother Earth and all those who've gone before us and all those who are yet to come. I never heard about psychedelic science until about a month before this conference was going to actually happen. And I applied for the Perspective Scholarship because when I saw the flyer online on Facebook, I was concerned. I saw lots of non-native people talking about a sacred medicine that's near and dear to my heart. And I talked to my mom and my family about it, and I applied for the scholarship. And my mom told me, if you get that scholarship, we want you to go and we want you to speak the truth and we want you to defend the medicine. So I came here as an emissary for my mother and for my grandmother and for my son and for all of our future generations. Mostly I came to learn. And I was so excited because somebody that was really important to me for a long time, that I've really, really thought a lot about his work, was talking here. And it was like almost like a dream come true that I was going to be able to see Gabor Mate in person. Today I saw an amazing interview of an indigenous Huichol man speaking about the pain that he feels when he thinks about the sacred medicine disappearing from our ancestral homelands. He speaks about when the peyote is gone, his nation will be gone. And in reality, we need to address the peyote as their own nation. That's traditional. It is the peyote nation. They're autonomous. And when you approach them, you have to approach with respect. And the medicine is so sacred and so powerful. It's not a plaything. That's what the elders always told me. Yesterday I sat on a panel that I shared that I was concerned, you can't necessarily do whatever you want with everything that's on this earth. These are ancient teachings that I don't expect anybody to learn overnight. I don't expect people to even treat people who speak the truth in difficult situations with dignity and respect anymore, because it's so unpopular to hear. I was re-traumatized at this conference, unfortunately, with my interaction with Gabor Mate. And I don't want to end on a sour note, and I'm hoping that I'm not, but I'm going to speak my truth because work is important to me as a professional. I have over 30 years as a mental health professional and a Native American mental health specialist, and I'm working on the first doctorate in my entire family on both sides. And I'm 51 years old. Does that speak to you about oppression? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I've worked my whole life to be able to have the resources to go and get an education. I've done it through scholarships. I've lived in poverty. I'm living in poverty right now to do this important work because it's where my heart is, because the future generations, really, they demand it. If we are conscious, like people say we're conscious, we have to remember what we're doing here. We're trying to make a better world for the future generations. And all of our futures are at risk. So what I asked Gabor Mate was to have an open heart, to have a consideration for indigenous people and re-traumatization through neo-colonialism of our sacred plants. That's all I asked. I didn't ask to be publicly pathologized by then being condescended to and demeaned in front of all of you by saying that I was a deeply wounded person. Clinically, that's unethical. It was very disappointing, especially coming from a superstar such as himself, whose books I've read, whose work I've defended in a clinical setting to chemical dependency professionals. But it's a burden that I am happy to carry for my son and for our communities and for other indigenous peoples. And believe it or not, I'm carrying it for you too. Because even if you don't understand it, I have a heart for all of you. Even if you don't understand my truth, I still have a heart for each and every one of you and your families. What I witnessed just right now is some things that I would like for people to consider maybe, which is like, if you want to learn about indigenous communities, maybe start with honoring your elders, taking care of your children, taking care of the guests that you invite. Those are all traditional foundations of social change. And it's based upon ancestral knowledge. So I originally came here to talk about how I'm using CBDs to treat anxiety and depression, and as well as using medical marijuana to be a preventative factor in suicidal ideation for people who have chronic pain. And what I witnessed is that there was nothing addressing suicide and psychedelics on the schedule. And I'm being told to wrap it up, but that's what my field of interest is. And I hope that I clarified some things that took place, and I hope that I at least expressed to you that there are valid concerns among Indigenous people about how our sacred medicines are being treated and how they'll be there for our ceremonies. And I want to say, before closing, I've never been to a rave. Good night and thank you, and may you all have safe journeys home.
So Rick and Bia and Amanda, please, thank you. As my final duty for this conference, and my really deep pleasure, to be asked to briefly introduce the three sponsors of this spectacular conference. I think the best conference I've ever been to. So, Rick Doblin. Rick Doblin, PhD, is the founder and executive director of the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Rick and MAPS essentially broke the logjam that enabled the current renaissance, psychedelic renaissance in research to start. Then, as MAPS grew, it funded a significant part of the current research portfolio and continued to maximize through pressure on the government, continued to maximize the rate of our forward progress. We would not be here in this room without MAPS and Rick. Can you imagine what this, in 1986, that you'd be sitting here like this? So, Rick Doblin.
I thought we were doing the other. Oh, I was going to go last. Yeah.
So I'm just going to introduce, I should have said, I'm going to introduce you all first.
Yeah.
And then you can go ahead in your order. So I want to then introduce, please, Amanda Feilding as well. Amanda is the founder in 1998 and the director of the Beckley Foundation and co-sponsor of the Psychedelic Science 2017 conference. Amanda Feilding and her Beckley Foundation have, with great finesse and determinism, British determinism, if you will, pressed an aggressive research and political agenda that has essentially doubled the momentum in the field. So, Amanda and Beckley, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Bia. Beatriz Labate, PhD, is a social anthropologist with a Center for Research and Postgraduate Studies in Social Anthropology in Guadalajara, Mexico, and the guiding force behind the conference Plant Track. And, to me, the best example of a prolific scientist activist that I've met. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn you over to Rick and Amanda and Bia. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, New. I would like to follow Isana and make also a confession that might be very shocking in California. I have also never been to a rave. And I don't smoke cannabis, but I hope I still pass under your criteria. I would like to, I think that the plant medicine track that I followed closely was a huge success. I think everything that I announced in the beginning really succeeded, and I saw some really golden, precious moments and some really excellent research taking place. The field is blossoming. There are so many incredible new opportunities, new modalities, multiple applications of psychedelics, and I'm especially happy to see the research on ayahuasca coming out so strong and promising so many things to the field of psychedelic science. And I also think that as an anthropologist, it's important that we recognize that psychedelic science it's not just about science. I think, a lot of us are here to find community, to find references. So a lot of people like to use psychedelics and they don't have too many spaces to interact and to exchange and to collaborate, and we kind of miss heroes that are recognized and legitimate, and this happens in this conference. So there is the surface of science, and beneath it, perhaps in the marketplace, going up, down, there is the psychedelic vibe going on. So I think it's honest to recognize that a lot of people are here because we complain a lot about Western society and the lack of rituals and the lack of references, but the fact is that we too are looking for references and for peers and for heroes and for idols and for places to recognize each other. And I think that this conference comes a lot to fill this gap. And maybe sometimes indigenous people will do strong diets to take plant medicines, and people like us prepare to experiences by reading a lot of books. And I think that's legitimate. We have this need to process things in this method. So I think that this conference provides a good space for us in this regard. And I also want to conclude by saying that I think that pursuing a career in the field of psychedelic science is a great opportunity. A lot of people talk about stigma or barriers or difficulties. I can attest, as a foreigner, as an anthropologist, as a woman, as a Brazilian, that if you really stick, to your views and your dreams, you can come up and be in this podium in the USA, talking about, being an anthropologist, talking to biomedical researchers. So I encourage people, especially younger generations, to follow this research path. The advantage is that there is little people doing that, so you can kind of grow faster because it's less competitive than other areas. And with that, I just want to make a few announcements that we're organizing a forum that is co-sponsored by MAPS on UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, on Tuesday, the 25th, with Draulio, Siddhartha, Tessin, and Katie. So we're going to be discussing possibilities of a future clinical trial with ayahuasca in the States. That was in your bag. You received this information. And we are also going to make a book launch in CIIS on Wednesday the 26th with Leopardo Yawabane, an indigenous apprentice from the Amazon. And I also want to tell you to keep tuned in our Chacruna outlet. We will be publishing more articles of this conference, and if you want to send your contribution to us, we are open to receiving it. I want to finally thank Brad. Is Brad around? I know I got on your nerves several times. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Do I talk with it? Well, I don't know if this works. It's lovely that you all came. It was an incredibly lovely conference. I enormously enjoyed it, and I hope that you all did too. First, thank you to the incredible MAPS team who kept so calm and organized it so beautifully. And I don't know, it's rather like the brain on LSD. It's an immense connectivity running through the whole occasion. And I do feel it's like psychedelics to a certain degree coming of age, in the sense that it's spreading the knowledge of the value of these compounds, and is what a lot of us older ones have known for a long time. And it's lovely to see all the new young people coming in and taking it up in all the different areas. And I think it's a flood of knowledge which now can't be stopped, because we're on the winning side. It's a win-win situation. Society will gain from taking on this knowledge and making use of it. And we're very lucky to be involved, I think, in trying to spread it and research it. And it's like being at the foot of a very exciting mountain. And the more work we do can only kind of strengthen the vision we have of how valuable these compounds are. And well, we're very lucky to be in this era and not another. And thank you all for coming.
Well, I'd like to start by saying I have been to a rave. And in fact, it feels so much like a family reunion. But the person that has known me the longest that's here is my college roommate, Chuck Dupree, from 1971. And so he saw me before I even ever did LSD. And we were, very close as roommates. And the college that we went to had both a very intense emphasis on intellectual inquiry and sort of going within. We were reading John Lilly about the programming and metaprogramming, the human biocomputer, and the work that he did in flotation tanks with LSD. So on the one hand, we were trying to create those kind of experiences for ourselves. And at the same time, this college had these all-night dance parties with psychedelics, with in Florida, then go swimming in the morning. So I kind of grew up appreciating both the celebratory nature of psychedelics in a communal setting and also the deep inner work that's necessary as well. And I think that's really led me to be interested both in the psychotherapeutic applications and then in the sort of public policy aspects of how do we do this in broader non-medical celebratory settings. What's been so clear to me is that this conference, I've spent so much time in meetings and in interviews that I've spent almost zero time actually doing anything about making the conference happen. And so the MAP staff and the volunteers, everybody that's here, has just done an incredible job to help us focus. Yeah. So I'd like to thank a group of people, and as I mentioned to you, if you would mind standing up so that we could all see how many people whose work has come together to actually make this happen. I'd like to start with Neil Goldsmith, who was our moderator here in the clinical track. Thank you, Neil. With some of the MAPS team, Brad and Brian and Bryce and Virginia and Steve and all the other ones. Please, you can all stand up. Great. Marita, for keeping me focused. Thank you. All the volunteers and the speakers, if you are one or the other, if you could just stand up for a moment. Just see. Wow. Wow. And then all the artists, especially Michael Faneros, who worked on the gallery, and Damian Jones, whose sculptures we have, and all the other artists. And then, if you don't mind, maybe everybody should stand up so we can applaud each other for being such a fantastic community. Thank you. Wow. Now, there's a few ideas or things as I think about going forward from this conference. I think the image that Amanda that you described about the connectivity of the brain under LSD, and I feel that was kind of the image. If I had to have one image for me of what this conference was, it was the incredible connections that we're all making with each other. And so this was like a conference on LSD, and that and that made me think about it, in terms of this is a psychedelic trip that we've all been on together. Some of us more literally than others at times. I guess I should thank the hotel for the pot smoking area out front. It's like, which I managed to inspect and enjoy quite a bit. But I think in terms of thinking about this conference as a psychedelic trip, what we know from the work with psychedelic therapy is that it's really about the preparation, the experience, and the integration. And so the preparation for us for the conference and the MAP staff has been years in the making. It's 4 years since the last conference. And I feel, based on the reception, that it was the right timing and that we had a lot of other work to do to bring the research to the point where we'd had a lot more to share. And the process of the actual conference, to me, has just been exhilarating. It's been magical. It's been like, I feel like I'm kind of in a pinball machine, and I'm walking down, and there's bouncing from incredible conversation to incredible conversation, and meeting people that have been throughout my whole life, and we all have so much to share with each other. But I think the most important part is going to be the integration part, and how we take the experience of the conference and also what we've learned and bring it back to our homes and our families and our communities. And so just on that note, I'd really like to encourage you all to reflect on those connections that you've made and those new contacts that you'd like to follow up on, and to really do that. Over time, let's really, over the next days and weeks, think about the new openings that were created, and then follow through on those and reach out to the people that you maybe have their cards or their contact information, and really let's ground this new connection and the new strength of this community from the ways that we came together here, and then let's put that into action, and then the sort of the trip of the conference will ground us as we go forward in a larger understanding. Thanks. There's sort of always this tension and balance in trying to keep things sort of focused and not go off one side or the other. And so there's several different areas that came to me during the conference, some conversations and things that I think we all would benefit a little bit from keeping in mind. One of the first ones has been this sort of tension or polarities between nonprofit and for-profit. And so as we are trying to think about going forward, there were meetings with the Bicycle Day Fund about them trying to encourage those people that had ideas that could be turned into businesses that were related to psychedelics to reach out to people who would be interested in funding that. I think as we go forward, this, for me, this idea of going forward in a nonprofit context with MDMA for PTSD, both in the United States and in Europe, is very essential, I think, to what we're trying to do. But I think there's one of the mainly advantages, you could say, of thinking in a for-profit context is that maybe more can be done in a faster amount of time, because there's an awful lot of need out there and suffering. And there's, like, for example, peyote. There's no research going on right now, really, with mescaline or peyote. There's just an enormous amount of things that need to be researched, and we need to think about how to manifest them. But I think for the culture and the sensitivity of what we're doing, it feels safer, to be moving forward with psilocybin and moving forward with MDMA in mostly nonprofit contexts. But I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that we live in a capitalist culture, that people need to make a living. There does make sense to do certain things in a for-profit context. And how we think about that going forward, there's no simple or clear answers, but I think that's just something for us to be aware of. And when we do go forward, if there are ways to do this in a for-profit context, I think we have to not do it in the traditional way, where you maximize profits and not think about the social consequences of what we do. Not think about it in the narrow way, but think about it in the broader way. So, yeah. The other one of the other polarities that sort of come to me a lot about this conference is sort of the legal, clinical, scientific research, and then the illegal use in non-clinical settings. And I would gather to say that very few of us would be here if it weren't for the illegal experiences outside of clinical research. And yet, I think the doorway into the culture is through these more narrow clinical settings that are completely legal. And so I think we need to both honor the requirements of the society to legitimize what means currently accepted medical use, and work as honestly and diligently and wholeheartedly through these legal clinical settings. But we also have to recognize that there is an obligation on our part, I think, to try to acknowledge all of the use that's taking place in illegal non-medical settings and try to contribute to helping it be as productive and non-problematic as possible. And how we do that is really very delicate, but I think we have to try to bridge that gap. And I think that's where, for me, the partnership with Amanda has been so wonderful, because we've both felt that there are these dual tracks, in sense of working with policy to acknowledge what's going on with many millions of people outside of the law, as well as trying to do whatever we can do within these legal settings. And so these are just tensions for us to be keeping aware of as the time goes by. The other polarity was this alluded to, the sort of indigenous use on one hand, and then the sort of Western clinical use. I mean, we're talking now about exploring with Bia. We're talking about people that have a DEA license to grow the plants that can make ayahuasca in the United States, and how we can then eventually get that turned into a tea that will be acceptable to the FDA, that then can be used in sort of Western clinical settings. And on the one hand, we're sort of what we see with psilocybin. I mean, Maria Sabina, worked with the mushroom, and we've sort of taken the psilocybin out of the plant, and we're using it in clinical settings that doesn't have that much to do, in a way, with the original indigenous use. And yet there's a truth and a beauty to Western science and to clinical settings as well. So I think this tension of both honoring the origins of a lot of this, the indigenous work, but recognizing that there is something of value of adding our own Western perspective to how we work in both clinical research and in therapeutic applications. And so, there's no easy answer to that, but I do feel both a debt of gratitude and even an obligation to take these indigenous technologies and put them into forms that our Western culture can integrate and accept. And by doing that, it's really not dishonoring the indigenous use. I think it's really honoring the indigenous use to bring that into a different cultural context. So it's a tension. And I think one of the other parts for me is this community that we're here, the psychedelic community, those of us that are here, and then what we're doing and saying with each other and what we're sharing, and then the larger community, how we sort of take what we know and then try to filter it into a culture that has enormous buildup of fears and misinformation from decades and decades and decades of propaganda. And how do we fully honor the fears that people have? This is sort of a small little sad story, but I'll just say that a friend of ours, my wife, our family friend, just 2 weeks ago, contacted us, and her daughter and our children are friends, and she said her daughter, who's at college, had a friend who had a difficult LSD experience and an emotional breakdown and wasn't really getting reintegrated. And so the family put her in an institution and for care. And this was McLean Hospital at Harvard Medical School, kind of the supposed premier psychiatric research center of America. And there's kind of an old-fashioned psychiatrist who was in charge of the ward. And instead of what we would do normally, I guess, at the Zendo or other work of trying to provide compassionate care for days and days at a time without tranquilizing, without pathologizing, helping people come. Instead, they did a lot of labeling and medicating and antipsychotics and things. And then there's a psychiatrist who's here that we've been working with to work on our MDMA phase 3 studies. And he worked at McLean. And so he tried to get in. The family contacted him. He tried to get into the ward to talk to this young man. And the head of the ward refused to let that happen and said that would be confusing to this young man somehow. And it ended up that they started giving him electroshock therapy. And it could be now he's on a lifetime track of having a label and having medications. And so, but it did start with an LSD trip that he couldn't handle. So there are these risks that we have to acknowledge, and there are these dangers. And so how do we fully acknowledge the legitimate fears and concerns of the society, and yet at the same time really move past the kind of reflexive response of prohibition and prison and help bring these technologies into more wider use? And I think there are, the big mistakes for me from the 60s, one of them was to identify as the counterculture. I think that's probably the key mistake of the 60s, because when you identify yourself as this counterculture, you're kind of setting up this opposition and you're likely to be squashed. And so we're doing the opposite. We're trying to talk about the mainstreaming of psychedelics. And I think one of the other big mistakes of the 60s was being the opposite of the oppressor in a way. So you could say that the forces of repression were exaggerating the risks of these drugs and denying the benefits. And sort of as a contrasting force, some of the advocates were, exaggerating the benefits and denying the risks. And so I think we've done a great job at this conference of trying to be reliable experts on both the risks and the benefits, and to try to get honest information out there. And I think if we can continue to do that and continue to think about how we are trying to bring things for those that would least think that it was for them, that the psychedelics are for the mainstream. I had this little moment when I was testifying before the Sentencing Commission last Tuesday about the sentences for MDMA, and it was with this DEA person who was in charge of giving Schedule I licenses for all the researchers. So all the researchers that are, being able to do psychedelic research, they have to get it from the DEA diversion control staff, and he was in charge of it. And we presented different perspectives on the penalties of MDMA, but then I had this moment, and afterwards, I just said, one of the things that's been really surprising to me with our work with MDMA for PTSD is that we actually had a police officer volunteer for our study. And that I had been so much blind to the trauma that police officers go through and how difficult their life must be to see the worst of humanity and to see all these tragedies and how stressful that is for them. And that we were able with this MDMA to actually help this police officer unburden himself from some of the things that happened to him in his career. Yeah, and and then this fellow said, "We don't want to stand in the way of your research. We want it to go forward." And how are we doing with giving licenses? I said, "You're doing great, and there's going to be a bunch more people coming in for more licenses." But then I said, "What about those marijuana licenses for growing marijuana?" And he's like, "No more." He could, it's beyond his pay grade. So, I think we need to make these personal connections, and particularly with those that are sort of on the other side and in the most unlikely ways. And I think even they are hungering for healing and for reaching out. And so it really is for them as much as for anybody else, for the other that we're doing this work. And so that tension. And also we have to be very thoughtful about how we're presenting this to the larger community. There's been a lot of media here. I did an interview with for an article that will be in the New York Times. And I think we are, I think the science, the grounded nature of the science has made it easier for us to present a very legitimate, respectable presentation. And so I think we will be portrayed in a very supportive way, I think. And so it's going to be then on our sort of responsibility to think about continuing that and keep in mind how we do reach out to the larger world. And so those are the kind of tensions that I've been experimenting with. The last thing, the MAP staff, we're going to be getting together a few weeks from now and try to figure out when the next conference is. I'll just say it is definitely not going to be next year. And so we'll try to figure it out, but it's an enormous amount of work. And we really need to balance kind of where we're trying to work on the core agenda and bringing the research forward, and then where we bring the community together. But we will be working together on future conferences, and once we have it figured out, we'll let you know. And I think the main message for me, the very important part of this conference, and the thing that was so exhilarating, is that in all of our differences between the different researchers, the different approaches to science and politics, how do we talk about the larger world, that we managed to keep it together, that we managed to stay together. And the strength of this conference was all of the psychedelic community coming together. And I thought, the comedy banquet, for those of you who were there saw it, just for us to be able to laugh at ourselves was just a real sign of strength. And so in closing, I'd like to sort of refer back to the last image of my opening talk, which was become more than a dream. And I'll tell you a very brief story, and then I'll be done. And the brief story is just where that came from. So in 1985, I was doing MDMA. There's some with Julie Holland. There's some question as far as whether it was the day after MDMA became illegal or the day before. But I was partially working. I was carrying on this, I carried an Apple computer and a big laser printer and stuff. And so it happened that there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that was about, mentioned MDMA. So I was writing a letter to the editor. And I was writing this letter about, sort of hopeful about how even though MDMA was now being criminalized, that we were going to try to work. And one day we hoped that the medical use of MDMA would become more than a dream. And when I went to print it out, something went haywire in the printer. And all that came out on the page was become more than a dream. And so I saved that piece of paper. I have it framed above my desk from 1985. And so we took a picture of that, and that was the picture that I showed. Now, shortly after the printer went haywire, I was just looking at it, and I noticed that somehow or other I had dropped a hit of blotter acid in it. So I'm not sure if this is my printer on acid, but I do think the theme to close this conference is that all of us working together, we can become more than a dream. Listen, okay.